Hey folks, I know I am just an old guy telling stories, but please leave a like and subscribe before we start. Let's enjoy in today's stories. I hired a hitman from the dark web. Disclaimer, before we get into the events that took place because of my life and the dark web, I just want to say, if I use a little bit of strong language somewhere, I am sorry. Let's get into it. My life is going shitty. My life is total shit. I don't think it can be any worse than this. I am a failure. Nothing in my life is going the way it's supposed to go. I am an unmarried man in my late 30s. My name is Sam. Like I said, unmarried, no kids, no wife, not even a girlfriend. I also drink a lot of alcohol, no real talents as well. I have a shitty job that I do not like, but at least I could buy myself food and pay rent. It's true, I was living paycheck to paycheck, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but I absolutely hate my boss. I freaking hate that man. He is a real asshole, but at least I had a job from him, and I was making some money like I said. Until one day, I heard my boss talking with the female hot secretary that the company I was working for is not doing good, and he will need to fire some workers. I also heard my name and a few other names mentioned. I also hated that female secretary as well. She got special treatment because she was hot and good-looking female. We all know she was doing more for him than only what secretaries should do. So, to be honest, I worked in a company where I couldn't stand anyone. I hated everyone working there. I was doing work for 3 people while getting paid minimal wage. So after a few days it happened. I got fired together with a few people. So in other words, my life was over. I couldn't afford rent anymore and I couldn't afford food as well, so I was dead man or soon to be homeless. So, in a pure rage, I went home. I was so mad. When I got home, I fired up my laptop fast and I went to the deep web, or the so-called dark web, or some people even call it by names such as shadow web, black web, or whatever. I knew all about the dark web. I knew about the browser Tor that lets you have access to the dark web. So in that pure rage I had for my boss while clicking from link to link, I came across a website where you could hire a hitman. The price for hiring was different depending on the hitman you wanted, and it also depended on the person you were targeting. If the person you were targeting is someone VIP, then the price was much higher, but in my case, I was targeting a small business owner. My stupid boss. So, without even thinking, I clicked on the cheapest option, the cheapest hitman that I could find on that website. You could text them and make a deal. That's how that website worked. Every conversation was anonymous. It was end-to-end encrypted. That means only me and the hitman knew what we were chatting about. So I asked if he could finish my boss. The hitman answered, "For the right price, anything can be done. After all, this world is run by money and power." I offered him some money. I will not reveal how much money for safety reasons, and after a little bit of negotiating, we struck a deal. The deal was he will take care of my stupid-ass boss and that stupid secretary. I just needed to provide some support from the inside, like taking care of the cameras and stuff. I agreed. The payment was made beforehand. Also, the payment was made in cryptocurrency. Which cryptocurrency we used, I am going to keep it a secret, but I will let you know this. We used a privacy coin. The day the deal was made was 9th April 2002, and the plan to take care of the garbage boss was to take place on 11th April 2002. Okay, so keep in mind this picture. I am fired from the company. I shouldn't be there. But my life was already over the moment I hired the hitman, so screw it. On April 11th, I went to the company. On the front desk, the stupid-ass secretary was sitting. The moment I entered, I cussed her. I told her how I would do the same things that the old parasite was doing to her. I cussed her personally, and her whole family, basically. She was like, "You shouldn't be here, you're fired. I will call security." I told her, "Shut the F up," and I called her the B word. I am keeping this a little bit censored for my own reasons. Anyway, let's continue. I told her I came to take my stuff I forgot, and oddly enough, she bought my lie. I went to the camera room where my inside job was. There should be a security in the camera room like in any normal company, but in this shithole there wasn't. It was free entry basically. So I hacked the cameras with software that was given to me. What this software was doing is that the cameras were still working. At least that is what will the police think if they check them after the incident. The software was mixed with some kind of artificial intelligence. The cameras were still showing the scenery from before, but when I click on my phone one button they will like to freeze the frame. So they will still show, let's say, the room, but any moving object or person that passes at that time will be impossible to be seen from the camera footage. Because over the real stuff that's happening, there will be something like image uploaded above the recording. I do not know how to explain this any easier, since I do not get it completely myself, so I finished my job at the camera room and I left. Keep in mid, I did not press the button, so even if the police checked the camera, I couldn't be a suspect because on the camera footage I already left before the accident. So I went into my old car and waited for the time to come. At 4 p.m. it was time. I pressed the button, the cameras were not working anymore. So now the only thing left is for the hitman to do his job. I didn't hear anything. He was probably using a silencer. After about an hour I heard police sirens, a lot of them. They parked in front of the small company. The weird thing is I did not see anyone entering or leaving the building, but I thought it was okay. The hitman is probably professional. So when the situation started to heat up even more, I drove to my house. And I quickly turned on the news. The news television channel was doing a live broadcast from the company, and they were saying that they found the company's boss dead. Also one female as well. You don't know how much I was overjoyed. I was so happy. The satisfaction I was feeling. You have no clue. That piece of was torturing me with work like an animal, while paying me nothing. Serve you right, I thought. Lucky enough, I did not get messed up in any of the stuff connected to the murder. Until one night I got a letter delivered to my house. It was covered in black. The letter was from the hitman that did the job for me. He wrote that now it is my turn to die. He also wrote that what he was doing is not for money, but just to pass time and for fun. So when I read that, I got so scared. I quickly packed my bag, got into my car and started driving. So while I am writing this, I am still on the run. I will continue running and hiding for the rest of my life, I guess. If you want, guys, let me know if you want to hear an update for this. And if you really do want to hear an update, if I am still alive, I will give it to you. Until then, Redditors, stay safe and away from the dark web. Let me tell you about this prom night I'll never forget. I was kind of desperate for a date, didn't want to go alone, you know? So I'm browsing the dark web thinking maybe I'll find something interesting, and bam, there's this ad for a date to prom. Not just any date though. They promised someone mysterious, someone exciting. And me being curious, I clicked. I started chatting with this girl, Lilith. She seemed cool, different from the usual crowd. We talked about secrets and stuff, and she had this aura of mystery that pulled me in. She convinced me that this prom night would be unforgettable, not like the usual high school stuff. Prom night rolls around, and I find myself at this sketchy old warehouse, the address Lilith gave me. I walk in and it's all candles and incense, like some kind of ritual or something. Lilith's there, looking stunning in this shimmering gown. But there's something off about her, something that made me uneasy. We dance, and it's like there's this weird energy between us, both thrilling and creepy at the same time. Lilith's touch sends chills down my spine, and she whispers in my ear about ancient deals and paying a price. At first, I thought it was all part of the act, you know, playing up the dark and mysterious angle. But deep down, I had this gut feeling that things were about to take a turn for the worse. And boy, was I right. So as the night went on, things got weirder. People were whispering about Lilith, saying she had a strange past and that hanging out with her came with a cost. It felt like there was this tension building up, like something was about to go down. At some point, Lilith pulled me aside and started talking about these old rituals and how she had this power that was beyond normal. It freaked me out a bit, to be honest. I mean, Prom night's supposed to be about dancing and having fun, not getting involved in some supernatural stuff. But there was this thrill too, this excitement of being part of something secretive and dangerous. It was like I couldn't look away, even though I knew deep down that I should. As the night went on, the vibe in the room changed. It got all tense, like the air was heavy with something you couldn't see but could definitely feel. And then, right at midnight, everything just stopped. Lilith stood there, looking all mysterious and intense, and she started talking about this pact. A pact that apparently we were all part of now, whether we liked it or not. It was like she had this hold over everyone, and we were all just caught in her game. I felt this sinking feeling in my stomach, like I had walked into something way bigger than I could handle. But at the same time, there was this curiosity, this need to know what was really going on. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning of a night filled with surprises and secrets that would change everything. And as I look back on it now, I realize just how deep I had gotten into something I never should have messed with. So after that midnight talk, things got really weird. Lilith started acting strange, like she was enjoying having power over everyone. It felt creepy, you know, like she was playing some kind of twisted game and we were all just pieces on her board. I tried to stay away from her, but it was hard. The whole vibe of the night had changed, and there was this tension in the air that made my skin crawl. As the night went on, people started disappearing with Lilith, and when they came back, they seemed different. It's hard to explain, but they looked kind of empty, like something had been taken from them. I tried to warn my friends about what was going on, but they thought I was being paranoid. They were too caught up in the excitement of the night to see the danger lurking beneath the surface. But I couldn't shake off this feeling of dread. It was like I could sense something bad was about to happen, like we were all heading towards a cliff and no one was paying attention. And then Lilith came up to me with this offer, this promise of power, and all these amazing things. But I knew there was a catch. There's always a catch with deals like that, and I wasn't about to risk everything for some temporary thrill. So I made up an excuse and left. I didn't look back, didn't want to know what happened to those who stayed behind. But I can't shake off this feeling that I narrowly escaped something really messed up that night. And I can't help but wonder what happened to everyone else who got caught up in Lilith's twisted game. After I left that place, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, making me question everything that had happened that night. Days passed, and I kept waiting for something to happen, like a message from Lilith or some kind of weird encounter. But nothing happened, and life went on like normal, or at least it seemed that way. But then, rumors started spreading. People who had stayed at that warehouse with Lilith were disappearing, and no one knew where they went. It was like they just vanished into thin air. The whispers got louder, talking about dark rituals and deals gone wrong. It was all so messed up, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for not doing more to warn them. At the same time, I felt relieved that I had left when I did. It was like a close call, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. To this day, I still think about that night. It's like a scar that never quite heals, a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. And it makes me wary of anything that seems too good to be true, because sometimes it really is. Looking back on that prom night and everything that followed, I've learned a few important things. One big lesson is to be careful with what we dive into, especially online. The dark web may seem exciting, but it can lead to real trouble. Trusting our gut feelings is another key takeaway. I had a feeling things weren't right, but I ignored it, and that was a mistake I won't repeat. Our instincts are there for a reason. Lastly, our choices have consequences, not just for us, but for those around us. Some people paid a heavy price for getting involved that night, and it's a reminder of how important it is to think things through before diving in. So, as I move forward, I'll remember these lessons. Life's full of mysteries, but not all of them are worth exploring. I'm a kickboxer, always looking for ways to boost my performance. Heard about these pills on the dark web that promise insane energy levels, so I took a chance and ordered them. When the package arrived, I was excited. Popped one of those pills, expecting a boost. And yeah, I got it. Felt like I could train forever, pushing myself to the limit. But then, things went south. Started feeling sick. Heart racing. Dizzy spells. You name it. Brushed it off at first, thinking it was just my body adjusting, but it got worse. One day, collapsed during training, ended up in the hospital. Turns out those pills were poison. Spent days hooked up to machines, fighting for my life. Looking back, I can't believe I took such a risk. Trusting pills from the dark web was a huge mistake, one that almost cost me everything. Being in the hospital was tough. Doctors were rushing around, trying to fix the mess those pills caused. It was scary, not knowing if I'd pull through. What hit me the hardest was the guilt. I took those pills thinking they'd help me train better, but they almost killed me. I couldn't shake off the regret, wishing I never got them. My family and friends were worried sick. Seeing their faces filled with worry made it worse. They tried to comfort me, but I knew I messed up big time. Lying there, hooked up to machines, I had a lot of time to think. I realized how desperate I was to improve, to take shortcuts instead of putting in the work. But I was also angry. Angry at whoever sold those pills, at the dark web for tricking people like me. It felt like a scam, and I fell right into it. As I got better and left the hospital, I made a promise to myself: no more risky shortcuts. I'll work hard, train smart, and never trust something shady again. It was a tough lesson, but I won't forget it. Leaving the hospital was a relief, but getting back to normal wasn't easy. Physically, I was healing, but mentally it was a struggle. Thinking about those pills made me sick. It was a constant reminder of how close I came to disaster. Returning to training felt scary. I had to start over, rebuilding myself from scratch. My coach and teammates were supportive, but they were worried. They didn't want to see me make the same mistake again. But slowly, I started to feel better. I took things one step at a time, focusing on the basics. It was hard work, but I was determined to get back on track. Along the way, I met others who went through similar things. We shared our stories and supported each other. It made me realize I wasn't alone in this. As I made progress, I promised myself to be more careful in the future. I'd never trust something shady again, and I'd use my experience to warn others about the risks. It wasn't just about physical recovery, it was about learning from my mistake and moving forward stronger than before. Going through all that taught me some important stuff, like I need to be super careful about where I get my supplements from. No more trusting sketchy websites or shady sellers. I also realized how crucial it is to listen to my body. Ignoring warning signs can lead to big trouble. Gotta take care of myself, inside and out. Then there's the lesson about not giving up. It's easy to throw in the towel when things get rough, but pushing through makes us tougher. I had to start from scratch, but I did it, and I'm stronger now. And lastly, sharing experiences is a game changer. Talking to others who went through similar stuff made me feel less alone. We gotta support each other, you know? Overall, scary as it was, I learned a ton. These lessons are gonna stick with me, guiding my decisions and hopefully helping others avoid the same mess I got into. Now that I've gone through all of that, I'm just looking to keep moving forward. I've learned a lot, and I'm not going to let those lessons go to waste. First off, I'm being way more careful about what I put in my body. Making sure everything's legit and safe is my top priority now. It's all about looking out for myself and avoiding any unnecessary risks. I'm also paying more attention to what my body tells me. Ignoring those signals just leads to trouble. So I'm making sure to listen up and take action when needed. When it comes to training, I'm taking a smarter approach. It's not about pushing myself to the limit anymore. It's about training smart and staying healthy for the long haul. And as for sharing my story, I'm all for it. If I can help someone else avoid the same mistakes I made, then it's a win. We're all in this together, right? So that's where I'm at now, just taking it step by step, learning from what happened, and staying focused on what's ahead. So one night I got curious about the dark web. I mean, who hasn't wondered about that shady side of the internet, right? Anyway, I stumbled upon this creepy paranormal blog that gave me serious chills. As I scrolled through, I came across this story that hit me hard. It was about this guy whose grandma gave him an old Ouija board before she passed away. She swore it had some kind of supernatural mojo and told him to keep it safe. Now, here's where it gets real spooky. The guy, grieving for his grandma, decides to play the Ouija board on her grave. He wanted to talk to her one last time, get closure and all that. The scene they painted was straight out of a horror movie. It was nighttime, the moon was full, and the cemetery had this creepy vibe. The guy set up the Ouija board, lit some candles, and started trying to communicate with his grandma. The blog went into detail about how the planchette started moving on its own, spelling out messages that seemed to come from beyond the grave. The guy felt this icy chill, like something dark and angry was watching him. As I read on, I couldn't shake this feeling of dread. The story talked about how messed up the guy's life got after that night. Nightmares, weird stuff happening around him, the whole shebang. It was like he unleashed something bad by playing that Ouija board. I was glued to the screen, totally freaked out, but also weirdly fascinated. It made me think about the thin line between the living and the dead, and how messing with things we don't understand can have serious consequences. And little did I know, this was just the start of a wild ride into the paranormal heaven. So after reading that seriously spooky blog post, I couldn't just leave it at that. I had to know more, so I kept clicking through the blog's archives, diving deeper into this creepy rabbit hole. I found this other post that went into detail about what happened after the guy played with the Ouija board. It was like his life turned into a horror movie, and I couldn't look away. First off, he started hearing things, whispers in the dead of night that made his skin crawl. He'd be all alone, and suddenly it felt like someone or something was right there with him. Then there were the shadows. He'd see them moving, lurking in corners where there shouldn't be any shadows. It was like the darkness had a life of its own, and it was watching him. But the worst part? The nightmares. They weren't your run-of-the-mill bad dreams. No, these were next-level terrifying. He described them in such vivid detail, like he was reliving a nightmare every time he closed his eyes. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, feeling like there was something sinister in the room with him. It was like the Ouija board had opened a door to a realm of pure terror, and he couldn't escape it. As I read on, I couldn't help but feel this knot of fear tightening in my stomach. The blog painted such a clear picture of this guy's descent into madness, and it was like I was right there with him, feeling every ounce of his terror. But the blog didn't stop there. It hinted at even darker secrets, stuff that made my blood run cold. It was like a warning, telling me to be careful or risk falling into the same nightmare as the guy in the story. I was hooked, unable to look away from the screen despite the growing sense of dread. Each click took me deeper into this twisted world of supernatural horror, and little did I know, I was on the brink of uncovering something that would change everything. So as I kept clicking through the blog, things got real intense. I stumbled upon this post that went deep into the backstory of the Ouija board, like where it came from and what it's really about. According to the blog, the Ouija board isn't just some game. It's a legit way to talk to spirits. Like, people have been using it for ages to contact the dead. But here's the kicker. It's not all rainbows and butterflies. The blog talked about this curse tied to the Ouija board. Basically, if you mess around with it without being super careful, you're inviting trouble. Like bad spirit kind of trouble. Reading about that curse sent shivers down my spine. It was like stumbling onto a secret that should have stayed hidden. But the blog didn't hold back. It shared stories of folks who got messed up after playing with the Ouija board, like their lives took a nosedive into nightmare territory. But here's the thing that got me hooked. The blog wasn't just about scaring people, it was a warning, a heads up to anyone thinking about messing with the supernatural. It was like, hey, be careful, or you might end up in deep trouble. Even though the fear was creeping in, I couldn't stop reading. The blog had this way of pulling you in, making you want to uncover more, even if it meant facing some seriously spooky stuff. And little did I know, things were about to get a whole lot darker. So as I kept scrolling through the blog, things got real intense. There was this post that talked about what happened to people after they messed with the Ouija board. And let me tell you, it was straight up nightmare fuel. They described hearing weird noises after using the board, like stuff moving on its own or whispers in the dark. Some even claimed to see shadowy figures hanging around, like something out of a horror flick. But the story that got me the most was about this guy who played with the Ouija board in this old, abandoned place. He said he felt this creepy presence, like something was watching him from the shadows. And then, the nightmares started. The blog also mentioned something interesting. It seemed like the Ouija board attracted bad vibes in places with a sketchy history. Like, if you played with it in a spot where bad stuff went down, you were asking for trouble. Reading all of this gave me major goosebumps. It was like the blog was warning me, like, hey, watch out, messing with this stuff isn't a joke. But even with the fear creeping in, I couldn't stop reading. It was like a car crash. I couldn't look away, even though I knew it was going to freak me out. So there I was, diving deeper into this world of paranormal chaos, not knowing what I'd uncover next. And let me tell you, what came next was beyond anything I could have imagined. I read through the final post on the blog, and let me tell you, it was like the climax of a scary movie. The blog warned about the dangers of messing with the Ouija board without knowing what you're doing. It shared stories of people whose lives got messed up after using the board, like they opened a door to something they couldn't handle. It was a stark reminder that dabbling in the supernatural isn't just a game. It's serious business with serious consequences. But what hit me hardest was this warning from a supposed expert. They basically said, stay away from the Ouija board if you know what's good for you. It was like a wake-up call, telling me to be careful with what I mess with online. After reading all that, I closed the blog feeling spooked but also kind of relieved. It was a wild ride into the unknown, but now I know to steer clear of things that could bring more trouble than I bargained for. And as I shut down my computer, I couldn't help but wonder what other creepy stuff is out there in the world, waiting to be discovered by unsuspecting internet explorers like me. But one thing's for sure, I'll think twice before clicking on anything too mysterious again. Alright, let me tell you about this crazy thing that happened to me. I got curious about the dark web, that sketchy part of the internet. So I went exploring and stumbled upon this site selling all sorts of weird stuff. One thing caught my eye, the Ouija board. I've always been into spooky stuff, so I thought, why not give it a try? I ordered it, thinking it would be a fun Halloween thing. When the package arrived, I was excited. I opened it up, and there it was, the Ouija board. It looked like a regular board game, nothing too fancy. But man, did it bring some serious weirdness into my life. I called up a couple of buddies, and we decided to test it out. We turned off the lights, lit some candles for that extra spooky vibe, and placed our fingers on the planchette. At first, nothing happened. We joked around, asking silly questions like, is anyone there? But then the planchette started moving on its own. It spelled out words that freaked us out, names of people we didn't know, messages that seemed too personal to be random. After that night, things got strange in my house. Stuff would go missing and turn up in weird places. I'd hear footsteps when no one else was home, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of something out of the corner of my eye, like a shadow that wasn't mine. I tried to brush it off, but it kept getting worse. I'd wake up to whispers in the dark, and the air felt heavy like something was weighing it down. Then, one night, I saw something moved in my room. Its eyes were glowing, and I felt this weird energy in the room like I've never felt before. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I tried to get rid of the Ouija board, but it was like it had a grip on my life. The hauntings only got worse, and I started feeling like I was being watched all the time. So, yeah, ordering that Ouija board from the dark web was a huge mistake. It's like I invited a demon into my house, and now it won't leave me alone. It's like I opened a door to a world of horror, and I couldn't close it no matter how hard I tried. After that initial spooky session with the Ouija board, strange things started happening in my house. It was like the energy shifted, and I was living in a constant state of unease. One of the first signs was the footsteps. Every night I'd hear these soft footsteps outside my bedroom, as if someone was pacing back and forth. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but it became so frequent and real that I couldn't ignore it. Then came the growling. I was in the kitchen one evening, just minding my own business, when I heard this low, guttural growl coming from behind me. It was so distinct, so unsettling that I froze in place. I turned around slowly, expecting to see my dog or maybe even a wild animal that had somehow gotten inside. But there was nothing there, just an empty room filled with the echo of that chilling growl. But the most terrifying experience was when I saw the figure again. It happened late one night as I was getting ready for bed. I glanced over at the corner of my room, and there it was, a dark, shadowy figure with glowing eyes just staring at me. I felt this wave of pure terror wash over me, like I was in the presence of something evil. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was paralyzed with fear as the figure seemed to linger for what felt like an eternity before vanishing into thin air. It left me shaken to my core, questioning my sanity and the reality of what I had just witnessed. From that point on, things only got worse. Objects would move on their own. Doors would slam shut inexplicably, and I'd hear voices whispering in the dead of night. It was like my house had become a playground for malevolent forces, and I was caught in the middle of their twisted games. I tried everything to rid myself of this haunting, consulting paranormal experts, performing rituals, even considering moving out, but nothing worked. It was like the entity had latched onto me, feeding off my fear and growing stronger with each passing day. Living in that constant state of dread, never knowing what terrifying encounter awaited me next, took a toll on my mental and emotional well-being. I felt like I was losing myself to the darkness that had enveloped my life, and there was no escape in sight. And through it all, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had unleashed something truly malevolent by dabbling in the dark web. The Ouija board was like a cursed artifact, a gateway to a realm of nightmares that I couldn't close. It was a lesson learned the hard way, a warning to never underestimate the power of the unknown. I contacted a group of paranormal investigators, hoping that their expertise and equipment could provide some answers. They conducted a thorough investigation of my home, setting up cameras, EVP, electronic voice phenomenon recorders, and other devices to capture any paranormal activity. During their investigation, they captured some unsettling footage. A shadowy figure darting across the screen, disembodied voices whispering faintly in the background, and strange anomalies that defied explanation. It was undeniable proof that something otherworldly was at play in my house. The investigators suggested conducting a seance to try and communicate with the entity directly. I was hesitant at first, fearing that it would only escalate the activity, but I was also desperate for answers. The seance was a chilling experience. We gathered around the Ouija board, candles flickering in the dimly lit room. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as we called out to any spirits present, urging them to communicate with us. To my horror, the planchette started moving on its own, spelling out messages that sent shivers down my spine. The entity identified itself as a malevolent force that had been drawn to me through the Ouija board. It spoke of dark intentions and a desire to torment and possess. I was overcome with fear and panic, realizing the gravity of the situation I had gotten myself into. It was no longer just strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. It was a battle against a powerful entity that sought to consume me. After the seance, the activity in my house escalated to dangerous levels. Objects were thrown across rooms, furniture moved violently, and I felt a constant sense of dread and oppression. I reached out to a priest for help, hoping that a religious intervention could banish the entity once and for all. The priest performed a series of blessings and prayers, invoking divine protection and cleansing the space of negative energy. For a while, it seemed like the entity had been banished. The house felt lighter, and the haunting ceased. But deep down I knew that the darkness still lingered, waiting for an opportunity to return and resume its reign of terror. And so, I lived in constant fear, always on edge, never knowing if the entity would come back to claim me as its own. The Ouija board had brought me nothing but anguish and torment. After the initial respite following the priest's intervention, a lingering sense of unease continued to pervade my life. It was like a shadow that refused to dissipate, a constant reminder of the malevolent entity's lingering presence. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Night after night, I was plagued by vivid nightmares, visions of the entity's dark silhouette looming over me, its glowing eyes filled with malice. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, only to find myself alone in the stillness of the night. During the day, I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but the trauma of the haunting weighed heavily on my mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a light bulb sent a jolt of fear through me, triggering memories of the entity's menacing presence. The slightest noise would send me into a panic, my nerves on edge, ready for the next supernatural manifestation. It was like living in a perpetual state of alertness, unable to relax or let my guard down. As the weeks turned into months, I sought solace in therapy. The therapist helped me unpack the trauma, guiding me through techniques to manage my anxiety and cope with the lingering effects of the haunting. But despite the progress, the fear remained deeply rooted in my psyche. I also took proactive measures to protect myself and my home. I researched spiritual cleansing rituals, meticulously following guidelines to create a barrier against negative energies. I adorned my living space with crystals, believed to ward off malevolent entities, and recited protective prayers daily. Despite these efforts, the entity's presence continued to make itself known. Objects would inexplicably move, doors would slam shut, and I'd hear whispers echoing through empty rooms. It was like the entity was toying with me, asserting its dominance over my reality. I reached out to spiritual experts, seeking guidance on how to banish the entity once and for all. Rituals were performed, sacred symbols were drawn, and incantations were recited in an attempt to sever the entity's connection to my life. For a brief period, it seemed like the entity had been banished, and I allowed myself to hope for a future free from fear and uncertainty. But my relief was short-lived. As the entity returned with a vengeance, its presence more palpable and menacing than ever. I felt trapped, ensnared in a web of supernatural terror that refused to release its grip. The entity's malevolent energy permeated every corner of my existence, leaving me constantly on edge and filled with dread. And as I sit here, recounting the harrowing experiences that have haunted me for so long, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever find peace or if I'm destined to be tormented by the entity's presence indefinitely. It's a chilling thought, one that keeps me awake at night, haunted by the shadows that refuse to fade,